It's time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Then I wrote an article about seniority rights for teachers. I was not familiar with the teachers' tenure systems then in effect in many states. I borrowed seniority rights from my father. It was a common expression among the railroad laborers where he worked, but I had seen teachers, excellent rural teachers in Greenwood County, pushed from rural school to rural school, pushed completely out of the system, for no good reason, by ignorant school trustees. I had observed in my county school system that the teachers who were doing the greatest work were those who had been allowed to stay a few years in one school. There could be good reasons for ousting a teacher from a school, but to have them pushed around without a justifiable reason by persons who hadn't the faintest idea what school teaching was all about, by school trustees who never had what it takes to make a teacher themselves, didn't make sense to me. This article was rejected everywhere I sent it. If only members of the State Department of Education and members of our state legislature and of our state Senate could have gone with me when I visited the Greenwood County rural schools, if they could only have been on the front line for a while and not so far removed from the actual scenes, I think we would have gotten old age pensions for teachers much sooner. And I think it would be for more than it actually is today. I was not one of the first to start fighting for the old age pensions for the teachers. Others had fought before me, but not any one of these fighters had been more dynamic in his fighting than I had been. One teacher in my system who had taught 55 rural schools told me that he prayed each day to keep his health so he could continue teaching. He said he prayed that when he did die, he'd go suddenly with a stroke or a heart attack. He confessed he had never been able to save a penny, and teaching was his only means of support. He had a fear of being sent to the county poorhouse. I wrote a separate article about this man as an argument for old age pensions for our teachers. None of these articles were accepted. The bitterest denunciation I ever made in print was in regard to the school trustee system. I wrote many articles about school trustees. In these articles, I said the state should pass a law to do away with this system for as long as members of the teaching profession in the rural school districts of Kentucky had to be subject to and controlled by these little self-important dictatorial drones, we would never have a school system. I sent articles to newspapers and to a local educational magazine. They were returned as fast as I sent them. If I'd sent these articles to magazines of national circulation instead of to little local magazines, my fight against these evils might have been different. I didn't succeed in getting a single one published, and here is what happened. 2 weeks before I left the county school superintendent's office, I gathered all these articles together, also a 450-page MS, The Cradle of the Copperheads, a nonfiction satirical denunciation of certain educators who fought against school reforms for their own personal gains, was included among them. I carried the coffee sack filled to the top with all these manuscripts and burned them by the big rock in our pasture where we salted the sheep. This labor went up in flame and smoke. On the morning of our regular board meeting, which might be the last one for me, I called Benton Dangerfield into a vacant room in the Greenwood County Courthouse and had an hour's talk with him. I knew that if any man had ever known danger, this man had. I knew that he could feel danger better than any man I had ever known. If anybody could give me advice, Benton Dangerfield could. "Do you think, Mr. Dangerfield," I asked him point blank, "that I will be in danger if I attempt another term as superintendent of Greenwood County Schools? Do you honestly think I shall be killed?" "Jesse, you have asked me to tell you what I believe," he answered. "I'm going to be frank with you. I think you are in great danger all over this county, except in the West End around Maxwell High School. There you are well liked and respected. In the East End of this county," he explained, "I think many a man that doesn't understand what you have done for this county thinks you are an enemy and will consider it an honor to kill you. Not just one, but many would do it. But why do they feel that way toward me, I asked. The East End is my part of Greenwood County. These are the people I have known, most of them, all my life. You've done too much good in too little time, Benton answered my question. You're honest. The politicians can't handle you. Will members of the school board re-employ me if I ask to continue my work, I asked. 4 members will vote for you, he said. Of course, Mooner Bentworth will be against you. Could you be re-elected if you support me for a second term, I asked. To tell you the truth, he said, we will all be defeated when we run again if we support you. We've talked that over. But that doesn't matter, he explained. We've agreed among ourselves to stand by you to the last ditch. You stood by this county. There are a few honest men in this world, and you are one. Thank you, I said. I'd made up my mind what I was going to do. I wasn't going to leave the teaching profession. Not me. Tobias Claxton called the regular meeting to order. While they were seating themselves, I thought about what Benton Dangerfield had just told me. I knew the gift of life was the greatest thing on earth. I didn't want to lose it now. There was too much for me to do. There was too much living ahead of me. Members of the Greenwood County School Board, said Manly Warburton as he arose from his chair, I make the motion that we re-employ Jesse Stuart, County School Superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, for another term. I'm against it, Mooner Bentworth shouted. Heavens, no! He stomped his feet as he stood beside his chair. Not another term with him. Another term with him will run me crazy. I arose from my chair before Tobias Claxton could rise to his feet and second Manly Warburton's motion. Members of my school board, with whom I have worked so long, I said, this time I am inclined to agree with Mooner Bentworth. I think it is the first time. Everybody laughed except Mooner. He couldn't understand that we were agreeing for once. I do not want to be re-employed as superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, I said. My school board members stopped laughing and looked at each other in amazement. But while I am superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, I said, and since Maxwell High School is without a principal for next year, I should like to recommend myself for that position. Did you ever hear tell of a thing like this? Mooner screamed. You can't do that. You can't recommend yourself. Why not? I asked him. I am doing it, am I not? I make the motion we hire Jesse Stuart for principal of Maxwell High School for next year, Manly Warburton said. I second the motion, Benton Dangerfield said. Then Mooner Bentworth laughed as I have never heard him laugh before. What's so funny, Mooner? William Dawson said. I'm going to vote for him, Mooner said. Get him that far away from this office this time, and next time maybe we can vote him out of Greenwood County. You don't have to vote for me, Mooner, I said. Because I'm leaving this office doesn't mean you will ever again work with a little handful of corrupt politicians to betray the county school system. I say he won't, Benton Dangerfield said. I'll stay on this school board as long as he stays, if I can be reelected to see that he doesn't. The motion was put to a vote. I received all 5 votes. I was made principal of Maxwell High School for the following year. Many a school have I let go. To be principal of Maxwell High School was something like a dream. I was getting better pay than I had ever received since I'd been in the teaching profession. I was making $1,200 my first year, with a promise of an additional $100 per year for the next 3 years. After my past experiences, I couldn't believe I was principal of a high school where there was a telephone in every room. There was a large gymnasium which we used for athletics and also as our auditorium. There were shower rooms for the girls on one side of the gym and for boys on the other side. And this was something for those who came from the rural sections of West End of Greenwood County, for not more than 2% of the homes had bathrooms. The walls of this Maxwell High School building were so thick not a sound could be heard unless a classroom door was open. If one walked through the corridors during a class period, one wouldn't know the school was going on, that there were 350 pupils and 12 teachers in this building. One wouldn't know school was in session except when the bells rang at the end of class periods and the pupils moved from classroom to classroom and to library and study hall. Though a double-tracked railway was not more than 400 yards away, down in Big River Valley, where more coal trains passed perhaps than on any railroad in America, we never heard the moaning whistles of the big engines speeding down the valley with their 160 loaded cars, or bringing back their long trains of empties. This citadel of architectural beauty was built upon a little hill where the ground sloped gently in all directions. Maxwell High School was built to face the north. In the front yard was beautiful landscaping with many kinds of evergreens. Between this yard and the National Highway were acres of pleasant meadows donated to the county by Dr. Maxwell, for whom the school was named. Farmers in Big River Valley mowed and raked these acres without cost. Beyond the highway was the railroad, and beyond the railroad were river-bottom farms. Beyond these farms was Big River, and beyond the river were the steel mills in Ohio. To the east of Maxwell High School were the low-lying Kentucky hills. To our west, Tiber River wound like a white ribbon down from the hills to join Big River. Between our football field and the Tiber was a forest of young willows, wild plums, water birch, silver maples, and elms, while beyond the Tiber was a palisade that lifted toward the Kentucky sky. I had never seen a finer high school building in all East Kentucky or in southern Ohio than the Maxwell High School building, and I had never seen a school any place in more beautiful surroundings, with as many acres of playground. Dr. Maxwell, a citizen of Ohio, had given all these valuable acres, also gave Maxwell High School a fine library. After he had seen our football players playing without headgear, he bought equipment for our athletic teams. Now, for the first time, I had the opportunity to recommend my own teachers. Charles Manson, who had succeeded me as superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, asked me to do this before I asked him if I might have that privilege. Charles Manson was a clean-cut, middle-aged man with 20 years of teaching experience behind him. He had taught rural schools, village schools, and in independent city school systems. He had once been principal of Maxwell High School. After he had been elected superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, I made an appointment with him to discuss the plans for Maxwell High School. The 1 hour's appointment was expanded into a full day. We discussed public schools, the needs and the future, and never before had I met a more kindred spirit whose ideas so coincided with my own. He felt the way I did about the school trustee system, about the old age pensions for teachers, teachers' seniority rights, and the unfairness of the dual school system in our state. My real problem came when I tried to find myself a faculty. Only 25% of the teachers who had taught in Maxwell High School when I was superintendent of Greenwood County Schools reapplied for their positions. Their salaries had averaged less than $100 per month. They had received only half of this amount, and 1 month had been eliminated from the school year. One of these teachers, a brilliant young man, was employed by the New York City school system. Another found teaching employment with better pay in Massachusetts, while a third teacher found employment in an Ohio public school system. The remaining half of the faculty, 6 teachers who had spent their early years preparing themselves for the teaching profession, gave it up entirely and sought other kinds of employment. They were excellent teachers, and I tried to persuade them to return to teach for me, but they wouldn't return to a salary which was less than $800 for 8 months. High school had begun, and I was still short of a science and an English teacher, and one of these teachers had to be able to coach football and basketball. One day in our first week at Maxwell High School, a car pulled up at the noon hour, and a nicely dressed young couple got out. They walked into the corridor and asked a pupil where they could find the principal. "I'm the principal," I said, wondering what they wanted. "My name is Charles Myers," the young man introduced himself. "This is Mrs. Myers, my wife. We heard you had 2 vacancies here. We've been to see Mr. Manson, superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, and he sent us to you. He said a recommendation had to come from you." "What's your major?" I asked him. "I have a couple of majors," he said, "science and math, but I prefer to teach science." "Can you coach?" I asked him. 5 years experience," he said, "football and basketball." "And what about you?" I asked Mrs. Myers. "I have majors in English, music, and languages," she said. "Well, come into the office with me," I said, for I wondered if this could be true. We went into the office and talked the rest of the noon hour, and I learned the reason this couple had applied. Due to the age and illness of Mrs. Myers' father, she had returned to her home in an adjoining county from an excellent teaching position in Illinois. Thalia Myers was a graduate of the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. She held BA and MA degrees from the University of Kentucky. She spoke 2 languages fluently. Charles Myers had done enough graduate work for his master's degree. The thing I hated most to ask them was whether they would accept the salaries we paid. Thalia would be the only one on my faculty to make more than $100 per month. She would make $103. Charles would get $96 a month for teaching science and coaching football and basketball. "Yes, we'll take it," Charles agreed. "With both salaries, we can get along all right." "You know, Mr. Stuart," Thalia interrupted, "after you once start teaching school, it's hard to leave the profession. When I see a high school building along the highway, I am homesick to start teaching again." That afternoon, Charles and Thalia Myers become members of my faculty. They were officially hired shortly afterwards at a special meeting of the Greenwood County Board of Education. My faculty was complete. I was proud to have a faculty of college graduates. Now we could remain an accredited high school. If we were compelled to use a teacher who did not have a college degree, we were dropped from the accredited list of state high schools. My superintendent granted me permission to carry out any idea that I thought would have future consequences for the education of the people in my county. I extended an invitation to the rural teachers of Greenwood County Rural Schools who had not finished high school or who had never gone to high school. I opened the doors of Maxwell High School to any person, regardless of age, who was qualified to enter. Mr. Manson invited older people to the rural schools if they wanted to get a preliminary education. This made it possible for an older person who had been deprived of an education in his youth to return to school and to receive an 8th grade and a high school education. 2 of my teachers were skeptical about bringing back older people and putting them with pupils of high school age. This idea drew criticism from many parents who had sons and daughters in Maxwell High School, but I believed it to be sound and that it would do good to a great number of people. I knew that it wouldn't hurt us to try it. Kentucky stood second from the bottom, where it still stands today, educationally, of all the states in the Union. There was one state below us. There was a popular expression among Kentucky teachers at that time, as there still is, "Thank God for Arkansas." If our plans worked, I secretly believed many Kentucky counties might follow what we were doing and reduce illiteracy in Kentucky to a minimum. I wanted to make Maxwell High School not a model school, but one that would do a great service to the community. I wanted to make this high school a beacon of light to eradicate the illiteracy of the older people and to educate the young. We'll stop right there today. Jesse's definitely led a very interesting life, and we knew he wasn't going to stay superintendent there forever or for long. We figured just the way things were going, and everybody was out to get him, and everybody was mad at him, and he was in that terrible situation then where he had to walk. He was really thrown out because he couldn't pay. I don't blame him. He couldn't pay. They needed their money, but from the hotel, and he was walking back and forth to his parents. But in the last part, we know that he's talking about on the street, nobody would talk to him, and everybody was against him. So interesting that he tried before we got to that part of the meeting at the very beginning, he was trying again. He kept writing, trying to get people to realize this about the trustees and about the seniority, and trying to get a retirement for teachers, and all those different things he wrote about. And he would write them, and then he would submit them to different magazines and newspapers, and nobody would print them. So he was doing all that writing, and you can imagine it would be very disheartening that nobody cared after he'd poured his heart into it, and he felt so strongly about his cause that he was right. But then he got, I guess, discouraged or just wanted to be done with it. And I wonder if in his mind too he was realizing that the superintendent job was coming to a close. He wasn't going to stay there. Anyway, he took them all together in a coffee sack, he says, and he took them up in the pasture and burned them. I don't like that he burned them, but I like how he said he burned them by the big rock, like we would all know where that's at. I think about, places here in Wilson Holler where I might say there's a big rock on mine and Matt's bank that when they were cutting this part out, they couldn't get the rock out. I mean, they could have dynamited or something, but they tried and tried pulling on it with the dozer and things, and they just in the backhoe, and they just couldn't get it out. So think about that big rock. But certainly other big rocks in areas. I think about there's a big rock in the creek where I like to go. When I was little, I could sit there and put my feet in the creek. It doesn't seem, I'm too big today to do that. But that's the same place on that rock where Pap would hang his cup in the branch so that he could get a drink out of the creek when we were working in the garden. Anyway, I like that, how he described the place by the big rock, like all of us reading would know exactly where that was at. I think that shows a little bit of that sense of place, like, well, of course don't you know, that's an important place by the big rock. So I liked that little descriptive. I hate that he burned them. And then I wonder if he was just like really beat down and discouraged, because then he says, it's kind of like saying, looking back, he realized maybe he could have got them published elsewhere, but he didn't try. He only tried in Kentucky there. So I guess later he's thinking, if I'd kept all those and I'd sent them to New York or who knows, California, wherever, maybe somebody would have published them. But it was too late for sure after he burned them. That's one of the wonderful things about our modern day ways of keeping track of things. Not as many of us are writing in notebooks and things. Some people still do. Even novelists, some of them still prefer to handwrite. But so many of us today, are typing on a computer and it saves it. And sometimes, even if your hard drive crashes, the right person can go and retrieve it and find it and get it back. So that's an interesting difference. Then he goes and he wants to meet with Dangerfield and wants to get his real opinion. He just tells him, I wrote down, I love the language. He says point blank. We would say that. You got a point blank. It just means like absolute. You just got to just point blank. Some places you hear plumb blank. But point blank, you just point blank got to tell him. Or that was just point blank the craziest person I ever seen. Or it's just like putting really emphasis on completely, you got to. So he said, I want you to point blank tell me. Well, then Dangerfield said, yeah, I worry about you all the time. It's a wonder that somebody hadn't killed you. There's lots of people that want to kill you, and then when they do, they would feel good about it, like they had done a great justice for the county. But then the nice part of that is, another part of the language I like is that, I guess Jesse kind of takes that in, and then he says, but don't worry, Dangerfield says, but don't worry, we're all going to vote for you, those four, not Mooner, so you'll get reelected, and we've already decided that. And then Jesse, has to ask, but does that mean you probably won't get reelected? And he says, yeah, but I said, I like that part. He tells him, we'll be with you to the last ditch. We're going to the last ditch with you. I like that, thinking about, Jesse kept getting them, I guess, off in these ditches, but Dangerfield and the others believed in him, so they kept going on his side and thought he was doing good. So they were saying, we're going to go all the way to the last ditch with you. I liked that too. They were going to stand by him no matter what. But then once they got to the meeting there and the meeting started, turned out it was really dramatic because they were going to nominate him to be the superintendent again, and Mooner stands up and says, no, can't believe this, he's driving me crazy. And then Jesse surprises them by standing up and agreeing with Mooner and saying, actually, I agree. I no longer want to be a superintendent. And I suppose, he says there that he he enjoyed life and he wanted to continue living it. So I know that he was, probably was really afraid for his own life and didn't want to leave this old world too soon. But I imagine, too, it was that he didn't want it to be hard on those other 4 board members. He wanted them to be able to be reelected. Maybe he thought or I think he probably did think they were good members and they could forward the ideals and the direction of the school system there, and that he wanted them to stay in place. He didn't want them not to be reelected. Because what if you got a whole board like Mooner, then it's kind of earlier in the book we learned that Mooner was kind of corrupt, and so maybe if you got 4 more like him, then it would just be corruption. And that's probably how the school system, remember, got in such dire straits financially. Anyway, I do think Jesse, I like this part, Jesse was thinking ahead. He was already thinking ahead. He's like, but I know I need a job. I don't want to leave education, and I know Maxwell High School needs a principal. So as I go out, I'm going to nominate myself. And of course, Mooner jumps up and says, you can't do that. And Jesse says, well, I just did, so I guess I can. But then those others come to his rescue and they nominate him, and he then that's a done deal. And even Mooner, as usual, votes with them. So he's going to be the principal of the Maxwell High School. And then he just starts describing it, about how wonderful it is, how beautiful. Now, Dangerfield had already told him, in that part of the county where Maxwell High School is, they like you. So that's going for Jesse. That's good for him, too. He's going there, and the people already like him. But when he describes it, the building with the big, thick walls and just the beautiful landscape and the telephone in each room. I never went to a school that had a telephone in each room. I wonder if he meant that, or if he literally meant every classroom, or maybe just he meant the offices or something. I don't know. But that's interesting. But it just sounded like such a beautiful school, and he had the gymnasium that they could do stuff in besides sports, and then they even had the showers there that the boys and the girls, and he says only 2% of the people in that area had bathrooms in their house, so it makes you wonder how many of those kids took a shower at school instead of doing the wash tub or whatever at home. But sounds like just a wonderful place for Jesse to end up being. He deserves a little break, don't he, after all he's been through. And then the man that took his place, Charles Manson, turns out that they have so much in common with each other, that they really believe, some of the things they think should change, like the trustee system and the seniority and the old age pension and all that. They just really agree on. So that is good that he's got somebody on his side. And even to the point that at the end there, when he's talking about, which really is like it sounds like the GED program, if you're familiar with that in your area, where people that didn't go to high school can go through the GED program and get their diploma. Now today, here in my area, it's not called GED anymore. It's called, I can't remember what it's called, but that's still what I think of it as because it was that for so many years. But anyway, in that part where Jesse's talking about that, he says certainly that was his, he wanted to do that at Maxwell High School. And he wanted to do it especially for teachers who were teaching, but they had never really got their high school degree, probably at some of those really backwood rural schools. And then they had not also, they'd not even got their 8th grade diploma, but then they hadn't got their high school. So he wanted to do it for them, to help them out. But then Charles Manson, says that he wants to do it too. It says he was for doing it at all the rural schools. So it sounds like that was like a county-wide thing, so that if you were there and you didn't have your GED, whether you was a teacher or you were just somebody in the community and you're like, I want to go to school and I want to get that and better myself and learn and, kind of have that diploma or whatever, you could have went to any of the schools. So that's interesting that he took Jesse's place. Of course, the most interesting kind of twist to think about that over the big picture there is, so he's kind of like Jesse, sounds like he's a lot like him. So I wonder how him and Mooner Bentworth got along. I wonder if from the beginning Mooner didn't like him either. Now maybe Charles Manson was more genial or affable or whatever than Jesse, and maybe he figured out a way to get around, to kind of keep on his good side, if you will, or something, or just to diffuse the situation. I don't know, but that's interesting that Mooner was so happy and laughing and was glad Jesse was gone. And it sounds like he's got somebody that's the next superintendent here is very much like Jesse. So interesting turn of events there for for Mooner. Jesse, of course, don't say nothing about that in this part. I don't think he does through the rest of the book, but we'll see, because we'll keep reading. I hope that you'll leave a comment and tell me the parts that you liked about this, and if you're like me and you're happy that Jesse's at Maxwell High School, he's getting paid, and it'd have to be an easier job because he's not walking around the streets with people wanting to kill him. And then he sounds like he's doing some good things. You know, he's got this GED program, or just the program where anybody can come back to school, and he's really going to reach out to those local teachers and see if they want to do it. But it sounds like things have turned around for him. Of course, I'm already wondering, well, where does he live? Is he still living with his parents or not? And if that's a further walk, or maybe it's a shorter walk. I don't know. Maybe he'll tell us about that. I can't remember. I've read the book, but I can't remember if he tells about that or not. But please leave a comment and let me know what you liked about this part. And please do drop back by next Friday so we can see what happens next.